So good morning to you all. It's a great privilege to be amongst basically youngsters. That's the target group which I always would want to sit and interact for two reasons. One is that that is the place where I see a scope for change, and second is to keep myself fresh by moving with people who are young. So those are two main reasons why I always do not hesitate to accept any invitation that is made when it comes to addressing students, and when it comes to addressing the students who are going to enter into this great profession. So I would want to first of all thank the Society for Advancement of Criminal Justice, which is part of the National University of Judicial Sciences, Kolkata. Um, in fact, I would want to start by saying that the what we are doing today, in fact, from my own personal perspective, I would want to say that what we are doing today is a duty of everyone in this profession, both from the bar and the bench, to interact with students who are going to enter into the profession, and to share experiences and to tell them as to what actually they are into, what is that they are going to encounter once they come to this side. So it's a fundamental duty, according to me, of every experienced lawyer and the judges to keep continuously interacting with the students, and that's the only way in which the students will be able to understand the perspective of getting into a litigation, and that's the only way where you give confidence to the students to take a decision as to whether they want to take up litigation or they want to get into something else that is related to law. So I thought it's my duty to interact with you, and therefore I'll have to thank you so much for inviting me. um, why is it important to talk about this? That's the first question I want to address. Why is it important? See, it's important because the students who have their own idea about this litigation, and thereafter they get into this, it's like getting into the spider's web. When you get into the spider's web, what happens is that once you're caught in this web, you start getting this taste of freedom. This freedom is the one which is so exceptional, and which is so so peculiar to this profession. Once you taste that freedom, what happens is, in the midway, it becomes impossible for you to really wriggle out of it and go, because you will not be able to work at the dictates of others. So you will get into a catch-22 situation where on the one side you are not able to really progress on the litigation side, on the other side you are not able to accept somebody as your boss who will keep dictating you to do this and that. So you will be caught in a catch-22 situation if you are not properly guided before you enter into litigation. So catching you at this most crucial part, at this crucial juncture, and informing you as to what you are going to get into, is very important. So that is why I feel that it's important to talk to the aspirants about this. Then let me lay down some fundamentals as to what you have to do before you get into this. So the way in which I'm going to structure my short speech is that I'm going to talk about some fundamentals. I'm going to talk about what litigation is all about. I'm going to go into the specifics of a criminal litigation, and thereafter I'm going to sort of interact with you and try to answer any questions that are posed to me. According to me, the step number one, I would say that this is the first step. The first step is that, are you willing to work hard? This is not mere words. This is a very crucial and important thing which you have to understand, because what you are getting into is a 7 into 12 into 365 days work. It's an area where you have to work hard, and there is no other alternative or option. And more particularly when you are getting into the litigation for the first 5 years at least. So willing to work hard is number one. Two, will you have the perseverance? Will you be able to persevere? Will you be able to consistently do your work without expectations? Without expectations, underline that. Will you be able to persevere? Will you be able to be consistently working hard without great expectations? Number two. Number three is, do you have the patience to wait till you really strike it in this profession? Step number one consists of these things. One is whether I am willing to work hard. Will there be perseverance from my side? Will I consistently work without really expecting anything to start with? Number three, do I have the patience to wait, learn, and thereafter strike it well in the profession? Step number one, if you're ready, we'll get into step number two. Step number two is that you are going to be thrown into a sea. You are going to be thrown into the middle of the sea, where everything will be new in terms of the experience that you are going to get. Carefully look at what I am saying. I am not talking about the subjects that you have learned in your college. I am not talking about the various specialties that you have done in your college. I am not on that part of it. I am on the experience part of it. Insofar as experience, procedure, and what you actually are going to do in the court is concerned, it is virtually throwing a person into the sea. So it's going to be like, it's a very, very new experience. And number two is, you must have guidance to wade through these waters in the sea, in the rough sea. So the second thing is, in order to encounter this experience, in order to smoothly sail through this experience, what you would require is guidance. A guidance from a senior, a guidance from a guru, from whom you will learn how to wade through this sea. Number three, do not even think about making money to start with. It's enough if you it's enough if you have the minimum to survive. That's the only expectation you should have when you get into this profession. For some time, you cannot support your family. The family cannot be dependent on you. In fact, it would be better if the parents know about this and they keep supporting their son or daughter who wants to pursue pursue a career for litigation. So therefore, this is step number two. Then, if you are fine with this, yes, I am willing to jump into the sea. I am willing to be guided by a guru, and I am willing to first grow here without too much of expectation of money, this and that to start with. I am fine with that. Okay, so step number two, you are fine. If you are fine with that, then go to step number three. The reason why I am going step by step is that if you are not fine with any of these steps, then I think you have to have a reconsideration about getting into litigation itself. That's why I'm going step by step. So I am ready with the first two steps which I said. Okay, what is the third step? Third is, please do not start. This is more particularly to the first generation lawyers who don't have a background, who don't have a family of lawyers, who don't have these connections and all that. Somebody who starts from a scratch, like my case, exactly in my case, where you start from nowhere. For those persons, it's very, very important that you don't start with any specialization. This will also equally apply to all those persons who are getting into the profession. Don't start with a specialization. Never start with a specialization. I would strongly recommend that you must evince interest in whatever law that you encounter during your journey, at least during the beginning stages. It's very important that you don't just focus on one thing and completely disregard the other branches of law. It is not going to help you. You may have to have a broad understanding of how the law works in different fields. So therefore, to start with, don't get into a specialization mode at all. Then second is a better way, which I found out from my experience, is to develop this habit of reading journals. Develop this habit of reading journals regularly and start the process of updating law, updating, understanding the march of law. You must keep this as a top priority. I kept this as a top priority for me. And if you want to call whatever I've achieved in life as success, this is one very important factor which has really lifted me from what I was when I started on the litigation side. So this habit of reading journals, updating, looking at the march of law, keeping the latest law at the fingertips is a very, very important habit which you have to cultivate. I'm using the word habit because come what may, whatever may be the situation, reading a journal must be made a habit to an extent like eating, sleeping, or doing exercise or whatever. You must make it as a habit. Then you are going to keep your eyes and ears open after you get into this profession. The first thing that you have to leave aside and come is you should not have an ego at all. My dear friends, you may think that I am coming from a top-notch college. I've completed my ILM, LLM in Oxford. I have done in Cambridge. I have done this. I have done that. All that is fine. But when it comes to reality, a person who has completed a 5-year course and a person who has completed an LLM, all will be placed in the same footing the moment they enter into the profession. So it's very important to leave behind all these years of I have done this, I have come from a top-notch college, this, that, just to set aside all those egoistic things. And these things will have a problem if you carry it with you in the profession. So every work in this profession is very, very important. It can be stitching a bundle. It can be affixing stamps. It can be to go to the registry to get your case numbered for to enable the case to be listed before a court. It can be for learning the nuances as to where, once an order is passed, where does it go? How does an order copy get ready? You have to probably, to begin with, sit with your clerk and start understanding all these things. So all these things would require an open mind without carrying this tag of ego with you. Just drop that ego completely. So everything that you undergo at that point of time, even though it may sound very, very silly and it may sound very, very small, but it develops a character for you. Once you are willing to do all these things, it develops a great character for you. Every small work develops a character for you. Okay. From there, the next thing you have to do as a beginner is that you are going to keenly watch proceedings in the court. You are going to keenly keep watching what is happening around you. That's why I said you'll have to keep your eyes and ears open. You'll have to keenly keep watching what is happening around in courts. How advocacy is playing its role in court. That is something which you can never read from a book, never understand from a book. If you try to understand it that way, it's like trying to learn swimming by reading a book. It is that absurd. The only way in which you can understand advocacy is by going to the court and watching the proceedings. How your senior is conducting himself, how the other seniors in the court are conducting themselves, how they manage the court, how they are able to answer the judge, how they are able to bring situation under control when it is going out of control. All these things you can learn only if you keenly watch proceedings in the court. So this is one more trait you have to learn when you get into the profession on the litigation side. Then never confine your reading to law only. It's very, very, very important. Never confine it to law. doing so, what will happen is that if you do that, what will happen is that it will not allow you to expand your thoughts and ideas. Your thoughts and ideas will start shrinking to law and law only. And I have found people who are too good in law to be lacking in even common sense, to be lacking in knowing as to what is happening around them. So never confine your studies to law. Improve your language, improve your language skills. At the end of the day, your language skills are the one which is going to help you to put forth a point effectively before a court, to put forth even a complicated question of law in a very easy way before the court. Because if the language which you speak does not reach the judge, whatever may be your knowledge, whatever may be your expertise in anything, it is going to be of no use. So therefore, the first thing which you have to do is you will have to improve your knowledge skills, your language skills. The only way to improve language skills is to hear what people talk. Go and hear TED Talks. Go and hear a lot of such talks in which comes in the YouTube. Go read literature. Improve your vocabulary. These are things which read a lot of books. So you'll cultivate this habit of improving your language skills. That's the most important top priority which you have to give. Read biographies. You'll have to read biographies of great advocates, of great judges, of great persons per se. There are some great biographies of sportsmen, which will give you a lot of strength, which will give you a lot of energy to pursue. It will expand your thought process. It will really give you a lot of confidence. So read biographies. Then read science. It's very important, particularly for persons who are going to do trial, to read science. And particularly, it has to be the physical and the neuroscience. You'll have to basically understand human behavior, how a human mind acts, what is the physical structure of a human being. This is more so when it comes to practicing on the criminal law. You have to have a good amount of knowledge about science. When I say science, I include within it physiology, I include within it neurology, I include within it psychology. All these things will have a great impact for persons who are going to practice on the trial side, because at the end of the day, psychology is the one which plays a major role in the success of an advocate in a court. I have seen people who are not falling in the category of some expert or who has a lot of knowledge, but these people with their sheer common sense and their ability to learn the mind of a judge, their ability to learn the mind of a witness, would come out successful in a case than a person who has a lot of knowledge and he lacks all these things. So therefore, this becomes very, very important. Don't confine yourself to law. Do all these things. Go do some sports, do art, watch movies. See, every bit is important. Everything is important. You have to manage your time in such a way that you don't leave any of these things. Till today, in spite of all my work as a judge of the court, of the High Court, I don't miss anything. I manage my time in such a way that I watch the latest movie, I watch the latest development in science. I am able to keep tag about the important talks which have come in TED Talk or YouTube or whatever. It's an ability which you have to basically develop if you want to make a good, if you want to make a mark as a successful lawyer on the litigation side. Please understand that having said all these things, one thing which you have to keep in your mind is litigation is a very serious business. It's a very, very serious business. It's not a joke to get into litigation. It is not your intellectual brilliance which will be the motivation for getting into litigation. Please, that's very, very important, because nowadays I see some people who think that just because they have attended some moot courts, just because they have succeeded in some moot courts, just because they have understood a lot of law than many who are practicing, they think that that by itself is a motivation for getting into litigation. No, you are thoroughly you will be thoroughly disappointed if you have only that as a motivation. See, there has to be an inner desire. If you will have to have an inner desire to connect with the society, to connect with the society in more ways than what the other professions can. You are getting into a profession where, apart from your expertise, apart from your knowledge, you must have this inner, I would say, the desire to connect with the society, particularly for persons who are going to get into the criminal litigation. It's very, very important. And this is a profession where you get in touch with the society at the very, very close way, both psychologically, emotionally, legally, and as an activist who will uphold the rights given to a citizen of this country. So our profession is the one which actually directly connects itself to the society in all these ways. Look around this country. Look around what is happening around us. You will find that there are many who are not defended properly, or who are not even getting good legal assistance. You will find it the moment you enter into criminal litigation. There are people who are required to be defended properly. There are people who are required to be defended effectively, who have to be given legal assistance. And that is more wanting on the criminal side, on the criminal litigation. And the litigation, particularly the criminal litigation, should not be treated as a pure individualization. It's not a pure individualization career choice. Understand that. It's not a pure individualization career choice. It's important to think about it from the system's design perspective. That is the one which has a direct connection with the society. So you have to have this in your mind. Don't get into litigation mechanically because my friend got into litigation, my known person got into litigation, or you have your own thoughts about people going in an Audi car who is a successful lawyer. He was successful in litigation, therefore I will also get into litigation. All these things are not going to work. As I said, litigation is a very serious business. Have this in your mind. So I was telling you that you will have to have a variety of interests, a variety of tastes in order to broaden your thought process. And I told you that that's the only way you will build up a strong character and a strong discipline. And unless you do this, you will not have this robust common sense. Robust common sense is an underlying factor. It's the foundation for a person who wants to get into criminal litigation. A successful career in law, particularly in criminal law, I have seen that people with robust common sense are the most successful on the criminal litigation. And this will happen only if you keep yourselves open, only if you are willing to broaden your views, your thoughts, your education, your knowledge base, everything. Having said that, where do I start? Is the next question. I would strongly recommend that you have to start your career from the subordinate courts. You have to necessarily start your career from the subordinate courts, and it is very important to do trial work sufficiently. Sufficient trial work is a sine qua non for anybody who wants to get into criminal litigation as a specialization in the course of their profession. It's very important. Don't rush to the High Court and Supreme Court without laying down a foundation. Underline these words. Don't rush like that. You may get into the chambers of some giants who are practicing in the High Courts and Supreme Courts and who are known to be authorities in criminal law. By standing near them, by hearing them, you may get an impression that you are also getting into that spree. Please understand that these giants, if you slowly notice these giants, you will find that these giants have put in so much of foundation in a trial court, and they have never come up like that straight to the High Court and Supreme Court. You can test any successful senior lawyer who is a specialist in criminal law. You will find that they all had this foundation in subordinate courts by doing trial work. Because you should, what will happen is that you will feel as if by standing near them, you are also getting, you are also acquiring that knowledge, and the people are looking at you and all that. The moment you move out of their office and become independent, you will find that you will be alone. You will be again in C. You will again find that your fundamentals are so weak. Your grassroots level knowledge of criminal law is weak. So therefore, it's important for you to start your career from subordinate courts. See, criminal law is all about what? It's all about procedure. It's all about evidence. It's all about the grasp on the ingredients of an offense. In order to understand all these things, you have to necessarily get into a subordinate court and do trial work. This foundation on the procedure, on the evidence, the way in which you take evidence, how do you do the cross-examination, etc., and the way in which you grasp the ingredients of an offense, how an offense is going to be proved. So all these things will fall in place only if you get directly exposed to it in a trial court. Only then the foundation will be strong. One thing is guaranteed. What is that guarantee? There will be no dearth in work on the criminal side. You can take it from me that there will never be a dearth in criminal side, on the criminal side. See, till human beings exist in this world, there will be crimes, there will be offenses committed, there will be innocent persons persecuted, there will be police excesses, there will be everything. It's not going to stop till the last human being in this world dies. So therefore, I can assure that there will be no dearth in work. At the end of the day, crimes are to a great extent directly relatable to the brain activity of the persons who commit an offense, and to a great extent the society from which they are coming, the atmosphere from which they have grown up. These are things which have a great contribution. That is why till there is a society, till there is a societal setup, these things are going to crop up again and again. So therefore, there will be not a stage where you will not find the work wanting to come. There you will not find any dearth in the work which you will get in the course of. So you can be sure about it. That assurance is always there. And you must also keep in mind that there is always a room at the top. There is always a room at the top from wherever you start your career, with or without background. If you persevere and if you progress patiently and you excel and you develop yourself, there is always room at the top, and it's only a matter of time as to when you will reach that room. But the room is there ready for you. There is a room at the top, and there is absolutely no doubt about it. The next thing which I wanted to say is that as a criminal side lawyer, after having got into a litigation side and choosing criminal law as a career, there are certain fundamental traits which you have to create for yourselves. A criminal lawyer must be a master on the facts of a given case. The facts of a given case in criminal law is the deciding factor in a case. You should be a master. You should be knowing each and every fact of a case which you are dealing. All the other things, including the law, it is only secondary. A criminal case is one more on the mastery on facts and the proper proper presentation of those facts before the court. Sometimes I used to say that the law of precedent, which to a great extent is governing the consistency in keeping law in its place, takes a backseat when it comes to crime. It really takes a backseat when it comes to crime. A slight variation in facts will make a precedent not applicable to a given case, and this will happen more and more in criminal cases. For instance, take the case of cheating. In a case of cheating, the law is that the dishonest intention must be present at the time of inception itself. It's an ingredient which is important to sustain the charge of cheating. Now, as a lawyer, as a criminal lawyer who is dealing or defending a case, an accused person who has been charged for cheating, it's possible for him to marshal the facts, to find where the dishonest intention is. And if he finds that such a dishonest intention has been imputed upon him midstream, in the midway of a transaction, and if he is able to establish it on those facts, he comes out clean. He defends his client well. The client, he establishes before the court on the facts given that at the inception there was no such intention, and there was some default in the midstream during the middle of the transaction, and that is what is now sought to be put as a charge against my client for the offense of cheating. Therefore, the offense of cheating has not taken place. Likewise, there is a clear line of distinction between a cheating and a breach of contract. If on the facts of the case you are able to come up with a clear case, or that it is not cheating, it's a breach of contract, which is purely a civil remedy, then again you have defended your client effectively from the charge of cheating, and the facts which constitute the dishonest intention, if it is not proved, you have effectively taken out your client or defended your client, and you have brought him out of the charge that has been put against him. So facts decide a criminal case. Keep that in mind always. Facts are the one which decides a criminal case. Then you have to understand about this system and see how it works. You may come from a reputed university, a reputed college, a college of excellence. You would have done your Oxford, you would have done your Harvard, you would have done anything. But when you get into the system, you will be sort of pushed into a root shock. You will be encountering some root shocks. You will find people, some wonderful people around you, and equally you will also find scoundrels of the highest order. It will be a shocking thing for you, but you will encounter such persons in the system. See, unfortunately, this is something which I am telling from my heart. Unfortunately, I find that we are now living in a country which is celebrating mediocrity. We are living in a country which is celebrating mediocrity. Therefore, never come into the system, into the litigation from some premier college thinking that you are going to encounter some great brains. No, you are not going to encounter such great brains. You are going to sort of face mediocrity on a day-to-day basis, and most of the times you have to withstand that mediocrity at every level till the highest forum. This is something which you have to keep in mind. That's why I said that you have to understand psychology. You have to understand how you have to put yourself or place yourself in the given circumstances. In the given circumstances, you may know more law than what the judge who is sitting there knows. But if you start showing that before the judge, then you have not read the judge properly. You have not understood how ego plays, and for showing your knowledge, your client will be the victim. So therefore, unfortunately, even if you are coming from a premier college, even if you are coming from, you possess such a high knowledge, you will be regularly encountering mediocrity. Come with a clear mind to handle that mediocrity here. The caution is that you should not fall from excellence and get into mediocrity. Understand this. You have to maintain the excellence. You are not supposed to be, you are supposed to get out of that and get into mediocrity. And understand that striving for excellence is a fundamental duty under Article 51 capital A of the Constitution of India. Never forget that article. We people keep focusing more on fundamental rights. We don't even care about the fundamental duties. And this Article 51A, there is a beautiful article, there is a beautiful clause in that which says that it is the fundamental duty of every citizen to strive for excellence. So therefore, you don't compromise on your excellence, but learn how to manage mediocrity and never celebrate mediocrity. These two things, have it in your mind. From the practical side, I would think that sometimes it will be advantageous to join a prosecutor's office, a public prosecutor or some prosecutor's office for this reason. During the beginning stages, if you want to specialize on the criminal side, the reasons will be the volume of work. Obviously, in a prosecutor's office, the work is going to flow because of the number of cases which he is handling than the work which a defense counsel would have. So the flow of work, the sheer volume of work will expose you to a lot of cases. Second is the variety of cases which he will be handling. As a defense lawyer, a lawyer may be dealing with 1 or 2, 3 varieties in his office, but in a prosecutor's office, it will be varieties. It will be a criminal breach of trust. It will be a cheating. It will be a hurt. It will be a grievous hurt. It will be a case of murder. The varieties are more when it comes to a prosecutor's office. That's the second advantage you will have if you join a prosecutor's office. The third important advantage you will have is that you will have the chance of watching how a defense lawyer is performing in the court. You will have the advantage of looking at or observing a lot of defense lawyers, because you are in a prosecutor's office, but the accused persons are defended by various lawyers. You will have the advantage of observing a lot of defense lawyers who conduct the trial, who argue in the courts, etc. You also will understand the system well. If you are in a prosecutor's office, you will get the chance of interacting with police. You will find how the system works. You will find how the criminal justice system is actually in play. You will find the difference between what is there in the book and what is actually happening. So you will be able to understand the system at large if you are in a public prosecutor's office. Of course, as I told you in the beginning, you will be paid pittance. You will be paid pittance, and getting the payment of pittance is of no consequence at all, because all the other things are the ones which are going to determine your future, and not the pay that you are going to receive from a public prosecutor. Understand that well. See, whatever may be your background, whatever may be the institution from which you come, the clients are not going to be confident in handing over the case to a junior advocate. They are not going to see from where you are coming, what is your knowledge. All that is irrelevant for a client. It involves his liberty. It involves his life and his liberty. So therefore, be prepared to take some very uncomfortable, sometimes insulting questions from clients. They will question your competency. They will say that, why is that your senior, how can you do this case when I've given it to your senior? Questions like that. There are lots of uncomfortable questions for which you have to be ready. So therefore, keep this in mind. The clients do not go by the degree which you have obtained. They do not go by the institution from which you come. They do not go by the excellence which you may possess. They go by the result. There is a confidence which is the underlying factor in an advocate-client relationship, and this confidence is built only over a period of time. Um, there are many criminal lawyers. This is also something from practice which I have seen. There are many criminal lawyers around. There are many, but I am finding that they do not want to go through this grind of getting trained under an experienced senior, joining a public prosecutor's office, trying to learn. They are not willing to go through this grind, and they keep adopting shortcut methods. And I find that sometimes they themselves behave like criminals. So their continuous exposure to criminals, their continuous exposure to crimes, not willing to really go through the grind of training themselves, improving themselves, and trying to find the shortcut methods will ultimately result only in they also becoming one of those notorious persons. And there are persons who are in the bar across the country, particularly in the criminal side. Some try to confine their practice to police stations or going through some kangaroo courts. They earn tons of money, but my dear friends, all that is short-lived, and it is not the way to reach the top. So the underlying factor is not what you are earning, the amount of money which you earn, all that is not the determining factor. The determining factor is that sustained willingness to go through the grind and really establish yourself as a top-notch criminal lawyer. That's very, very important. And as a criminal lawyer, as I said, the art of cross-examination, it's a key to success for a criminal lawyer. Only when you go through this grind, you will be able to understand what to ask, what not to ask, when to stop asking, how to quit after getting a favorable answer from a witness. All these things will have to be learned through training and experience. It is very important that you learn this art. This is an art. This does not come automatically to some. This comes easier for some persons who have this robust common sense. For many, it comes only through regular practice, regular interaction, regular observation, regularly reading the minds of people, etc. So when you are confident enough to handle a cross-examination, my dear friends, I must tell you that it is like a drug. It is exactly like a drug. It gives you a very great feeling when you complete a successful cross-examination and you are able to really pierce in a very difficult witness who is not coming up with an answer, and you are able to break him and come up with a favorable answer. It dopamine secretes. I will tell you that. So it's a great feeling to do a cross-examination of a witness in the box. See, thinking on your feet is one of the greatest trait of advocacy. Thinking on your feet in a cross-examination, sometimes you will be very aggressive with questions that are put to the witness. Sometimes it will be very respectful. Sometimes you will be timid and you will be even acting foolish as if you don't know. Go around, get an answer from the client, from the witness. So at the end of the day, the successful criminal lawyer is the one who is able to extract a favorable answer from the witness by developing his skill of cross-examination. That's a very, very important trait which you develop only by going through this grind, because cross-examination involves your thorough knowledge on Evidence Act. You'll have to know what are relevant facts. You'll have to know what are admissible. You have to know the mode of proof of evidence. If you're not thorough with all those things, howsoever great you are in your common sense, it's not going to work, because you'll have to use it within the four corners of the Evidence Act. So therefore, at the end of the day, it will happen only if you are continuously exposed to this experience of watching others, you doing, your senior doing, the Evidence Act, the way in which the judge puts it, the variety of witnesses who come into the box. All these things ultimately make you a very successful criminal lawyer over a period of time. One other very important factor which I wanted to tell you is that the society definitely attaches an element of stigma on people, on persons who are practicing on the criminal side. I frankly tell you this. They think that these are advocates who are defending, dangerous criminals, fraudsters, extremists, etc. And they have a very, very negative feeling about a criminal lawyer. We are unfortunately in a society like that. What these people don't understand is that what they are hearing and what they are reading may not always be correct, may not be the real fact at all. There are possibilities that innocent peoples are roped in a case. There are possibilities. At the end of the day, it is not for the lawyer to decide whether someone has committed an offense. It is the duty of the prosecution to prove, and it is for the court to decide the case, and it is not the job of a lawyer. Just imagine a situation like this. There is a charge of 149 read with 302. I am just giving you a sort of example for you to understand it well. There is a charge of 149 read with 302, and there is a client who has come to you who has been ranked as accused number 6 in that case. He comes and tell you that, sir, I have nothing to do with what happened on that day. We are all friends, and one of the person who is deceased in this case, he had sort of conducted himself badly with a girl belonging to our neighborhood. So therefore, all of us went to question him as to why he behaved in such a manner. In the course of this happening, one of the person who was in the group independently gets into a fight with that person, and in the course of the fight, he kills him by hitting him with an iron rod that was available there. So your client says that we never intended for all these things, and that was not the purpose for which we went, but it turned out to be that, and the person who died is a very important person in the locality. So what happens? The social media immediately starts pouring with a lot of views. People start giving their own opinion about the whole thing, and the people don't have the full knowledge as to what has happened, and there is a hue and cry, and the person, if he is a politician or the family belonging to politician, then it goes to a different level altogether. Now there is a client before you, and people are saying that, why are you defending a person like him? But look at the person who has come to you. The person who has come to you never had any such intention. He went along with his friends for the purpose of questioning this man for his bad behavior with a girl, and it turned out that one person reacted that way. So therefore, there's a charge of 149 is established against him. Probably your client is doing final year degree course, BL course, and he has been made as an accused. His future is at stake. Therefore, my dear friends, it's not important. It is waste of time to look at what the society is calling you, or what the society is, the way in which the society is looking at you. That's not your job. Your job is to defend your client to the hilt. So therefore, one very, very common question that is asked when people get into criminal litigation is whether you should continue with the case when you know that the person for whom you are taken up defense has committed an offense. This is a very, very common question which is asked always for centuries together. See, I would recommend all of you to read one judgment of Justice Mukherjee in King Emperor versus Birendra. That's from your court only, from Calcutta High Court only. King Emperor versus Birendra. It is reported in 28 Calcutta Weekly Notes, page 170. You will get an answer exactly at page 183. It's a beautiful discussion that would have taken place. See, understand this. There is nothing unprofessional in a counsel taking up an engagement. There is nothing unprofessional, and he must do his best for his client. That's all. Ultimately, Article 21 guarantees life and liberty, which cannot be deprived except according to the procedure established by law. It does not say for a notorious criminal, Article 21 will not apply. It will apply only to simple of no. Article 21 does not differentiate like that at all. So when I hear people saying you should not defend Kasab, you should not defend the accused persons in Nirbhaya rape case, you should not defend persons who are involved in POXO offenses, it's not an argument at all. You have to, everyone is entitled for an effective defense. There is absolutely nothing unprofessional in a lawyer taking up a case for an accused person, and there is absolutely no taboo just because the society says that you should not be taking up cases like that. In fact, with great respect to some of the judges, I have seen some judges asking from the bench as to, sir, how is it that you can take up cases like this? How is it that you can defend an accused person like him? How foolish. How can a question like that be asked? Everyone is entitled for an effective defense before a court. That is guaranteed under Article 20 of the Constitution of India. It is ultimately for the prosecution to establish the case and the court to decide a case. So this bar association sometimes getting emotional and saying that none of us from the bar will defend this accused. How foolish it is. It can never happen. It is, according to me, a professional misconduct if you do something like that. So if you don't have this bent of mind of having this distancing yourself from this, better you don't get into criminal litigation. Because if you have these questions coming again and again, it is better that you don't get into criminal litigation. Don't get me wrong. That does not mean that you will buy out witnesses, that you will make them hostile by doing some underhand dealings. You will tamper with evidence. I'm not saying that. You are not supposed to do all that. You have to do whatever is done, whatever is given to you under law. That's all. You have to do your duty and get out. So you have to act within the four corners of law and leave the rest to the court. Leave the rest to the court. Never ever, please underline these words, never ever compromise on professional ethics and fairness to the court, particularly in the criminal side, because in a longer run, that's the one which will keep you sustained in the profession. That's the one which will take you to great heights in the profession. Keep that in your mind. Then I must also tell you that the type of client that you start getting over a period of time will depend upon your conduct over that period of time in the profession. You can ask me, how do you know that? Because I have practiced it. During my practicing period, since I had set certain fundamentals when it comes to ethics, when it comes to fairness, the word spreads or gets out very fast. Please understand that. You don't need a WhatsApp and you don't need a Facebook for all these things. The word goes out very fast. People know who you are. The moment you start practicing, people know what type of cases you handle, what type of cases you will not even go near. So the type of clients which you get in the course of your practice are it will depend upon the conduct, your conduct in the course of your practice. Even if you get more of appellate practice after a period of time, I always personally feel that you must continue to do trial work. You can be choosy. The more you get senior, you can be choosy about the work which you get. But it is better that you continue to do trial work. And that's the only way to keep yourself sharp on the procedure and the Evidence Act. That's the only way to do it. See, what happens is that sometimes people who straight away get into the appellate side and the judges who have not practiced on the criminal side and start deciding some murder appeals and all that, I have found that merely relying upon 161 statements of the witnesses which are collected during the course of investigation have been relied upon for convicting people for life sentence. It's shocking, but all those things have happened. Reason why those things keep happening is because you are not good in your fundamentals. Because a statement under 161 becomes inadmissible under 162. It cannot even be looked into for the purpose of deciding a case. So these are fundamentals the Evidence Act. You are not, we are not, you don't know the various provisions in the Evidence Act. What is the effect that you will have to give for the statement of an accused, the confession of an accused, how it has to be treated, how it can be used against another accused. If you don't know the fundamentals, it's possible that you will convict a person merely based on some confession given by an accused, which is not substantiated by the other facts that are available before you. So therefore, the problem is that if you condition your mind, if there is a conditioning in your mind, and you think that, yep, I know everybody is a criminal who comes here, everybody who is a scoundrel, if you condition it like that, and if you are not strong on your fundamentals, it's possible that you will keep repeating such mistakes again and again. This is not only to the bar, but to the bench also. According to me, defense lawyers play a major role in keeping a balance in this society. The society may have their own impressions about all that, but according to me, defense lawyers are playing a very, very major role, and they are the ones who are questioning the authority of a CBI or a police or a CCB or a CBCID, and they ensure that they voice and they ensure that the life and liberty of a citizen is not taken away unless otherwise by law, due process of law. And they are the voices who preserve this most important right that is given under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. Article 21 of the Constitution of India is dealt with on a daily basis only by defense lawyers. That's the most cherished right in our Constitution, and that's the one which is dealt with by them on a daily basis. And this is a salutary function that is performed by the defense lawyers who are practicing on the criminal side. Insofar as the women lawyers are concerned, before I conclude, there are practical difficulties faced by them when they want to get into criminal law. But I'll have to tell you one thing. Unless and otherwise more number of women walk in the corridors of a court, the situation will not change. There must be more and more lawyers, women lawyers, who have to get into the field. The more the number increases, the more they will get established, the more they will be recognized. Till then, it is going to be a real uphill task for a women lawyer to make their mark in the profession. But that is not a ground for you not to choose criminal law as a career. There are very many successful lawyers, women lawyers, who have made it really big on the criminal side. So probably you can choose area of comfort when it comes to dealing with cases like the white collar crimes, or the crimes against women, children, or the cyber crimes, etc. So you have to break those barriers in your mind when it comes to it. That's the only way in which you will be able to really make a mark on the criminal side, particularly for the women lawyers. So I have nothing more to add. These are all the thoughts which came to my mind, and I wanted to share it with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, your speech was exceptionally holistic, and it also reminded me of my college days when our seniors, our faculties used to advise us to read a magazine known as Lawyers Update, and it was a and it is still continuing, and very interesting articles, bits and pieces, how the law is used to get connected, how what are the practical difficulties. I would also advise the students to kindly subscribe them, and now we already have it in the online forum also. So that is a very interesting. And sir, also as you mentioned everything, like from being to the ability to read human minds, to read human behavior is a very important aspect to when we actually go in for litigation. I mean, sometimes we also have to understand with the court clerk, with the blink of an eye, that what he is trying to say and what the judge we should not say. And it is more important to in a live court experience, I can say from my very less amount of experience in the practice day, that what not to say and what not to do in a courtroom. You may say something which may which may offend the court clerk. Forget about the judge exceptionally well. Now, sir, you also mention about the robust common sense, and it is not a place actually for where we'll have intellectual discussions. It is more about what how the work can be done, or it is a more relief oriented from what I get from your words, that how we can give relief to our client by letting our egos go and answering whatever question what the client may have about the case, about what we do, what we cannot do. And it is very important to respect that. I had also seen that clients do not have, some clients or some advocates, it's all subject to restriction, that they do not give the papers which they have filed in the court. And it is a very bad practice which some advocates, with all due respect, they have. Like, a client will happy that yes, what is filed in the court, I also have a copy about it, or the how the orders come. So it is very important from the all the aspects of earning money and from when we start earning money. And sir, you also actually very well substantiated about the role of subordinate courts and how do, and the essence why we should start from there. Because how a bail application in the high court in terms of section 439 and 438 can be only understood when actually the reason of bail is coming out. Because we all know, sir, as you also said, it is a court of records. So how those records were created, it is very important. Whoever the students wishes to or willing to take up litigation as a practice. And so it is very also very well you establish the fact that learning what at the public prosecutor's office, so many briefs, and also in my limited days of practice, what I saw, so many kinds of brief. How do you communicate to a police station, what document to bring, what are the particulars, how to explain the police who is also a witness in the case, what not to say, what to say. It is a enlightening experience in the public prosecutors. And sir, lastly, what you mentioned about the role of ethics and accountability, I, as per what I feel, it should be to us what ethics and accountability we hold ourselves to, and what kind of commitment with the role of e-courts. If we share a wrong date to the client, or a date which is not correct, or a order which is not correct, whereas the order is something like that, or the date is something like that, many clients do not know that we have e-courts. Fine, but we should not take advantage of that. That's what one example I would like to say about what you, sir, mentioned about e-courts. So now, with your due respect, if we can go ahead with the question answer.
Yeah. Yes.
Sir, two things I had from my list is that, sir, your kind views on about joining the state panel as a on our early days when a student wishes to join litigation.
State panel meaning the prosecutor's office or
Yes,
the
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
See, one major advantage you will get is that the sheer volume of work which you will be encountering and the experience that you will be gaining, there is no comparison at all. According to me, immediately after you complete the course and you join the profession, it is always safer to be under somebody for some time. It's not very safe to straight away start going and doing cases, because there are lots of rough edges which requires to be ironed out, and that's something which you have to learn, or else what happens is that you may not be able to put forth a point properly before a court because of your lack of experience or lack of training, which would ultimately go against you. So it's a court craft which you have to learn, and only thereafter start appearing for anyone. It can be a state panel, it can be independent, it can be anything, but all those things can happen only after some training with an experienced lawyer, with a senior.
Accepted, sir. Sir, with a connecting question which you just mentioned now, we have one participant, Miss Anjali Jha, which she also is pondering on the same area, that if we have a willingness to come to this criminal litigation, and due to the cutthroat competition and how difficulty for senior to find a senior, to find a guru, as you mentioned, what a person or what a student may do.
See, I think that getting a good senior has something to do with destiny. If you ask me what is the formula, there is no formula at all for that. It has a direct link with destiny. Like how sure I am if with a like that I am going to have a happy married life. It's like that. How many times you can give an assurance that every marriage is going to end up to be a successful marriage? Same way, particularly in an era like this, the present era. See, there was a time where the system itself was having a senior junior as a starting point to get into the profession. There were many seniors who were willing to do it. Now this firm concept has come in. Now I find that people who have practiced for 2-3 years, and by virtue of their contacts and all that, have a big clientele, they become seniors to some juniors. I never understood as to how they got into the position of a senior in the first case. So choosing of a senior, yes, it requires some sort of a research and some sort of an effort on the side of a person, of a student who is very serious about getting into litigation. You have to choose. You have to do your research. You have to talk with people. You have to ensure that you get into a good office, because it's possible that when you get into a bad office, those influences will also have an impact on you. You are like a blotting paper to start with. You will start observing things, good or bad. So it's an effort which you have to put in, and destiny surely plays its role in that.
So the next thing is about Mr. Arya Kant. He wishes your views on the Bar Council of India's new change in the policy to have a mandatory 3-year practice before joining the judicial service. Whether it will discourage or to encourage in coming into litigation.
See, let me tell you from the personal perspective. According to me, nobody must get into judicial service without practicing. There are so many reasons for that. The reasons are, one, there are, in a given case, there are a lot of perspectives which you will find. There is a client perspective, there is an advocate perspective, and also there is a perspective in terms of the contribution to law. See, if you straight away get into judiciary, you will not understand a case on the from an angle of an advocate at all. You will be more of a bookish person. You will the case will come before you. Just think about some student who has completed the law course and sitting as a judge in a court. What happens? A case comes before him. There are facts placed before him. What does he know? He knows the ingredients of this offense. He will take those facts. He will see whether they are going they are satisfying the ingredients of an offense. He'll come to some conclusions. But if it is a person who is sitting as a judge, has an experience as an advocate, the issue is that the type of cases which come in, the type of facts that requires an appreciation, the type of things which requires appreciation, the perspective itself will be very, very different when you practice and then become a judge. You will be able to see it in the High Court itself. Just closely watch what is happening in the High Court. In a given jurisdiction, the way in which a judge who has practiced an advocate deals with the case, and the way in which a person who has come from the subordinate judiciary handles a case will be very, very different. And you will find that the scope of appreciation will be more from a person who has practiced and come in as a judge. There is nothing inferior or superior about it, but the experience which you gain as an advocate has a lot of bearing when you sit as a judge. There are lots of finer aspects which you will never understand if you straight away become a judge after completing a course.
Very correct, sir. So the next question would like to take up is on that Shashwat request about how do judges deal with the media trials and the pressure in some highly sensitive cases, and how much do the public statements play a role while deciding a case?
This is a very important question, because the present day judges are facing a very peculiar problem which was not faced by judges of the 80s and 90s, I would say, or before that. See, today what has happened is that the social media is parallelly conducting a trial with whatever facts they get. They come to a conclusion and they want the court also to come to the same conclusion. They don't understand the risk that is involved in this. The risk that is involved in this is that you are not privy to all those materials that are placed before a court. Whatever details you are getting are all, it all comes in bits and pieces from some places, and depending upon the emotion that is involved in a particular case, you come to your own conclusion. And this happens more in the case of offenses under POCSO, offenses under political offenses, offenses involving women, etc. So it's as a judge, it is very important that he has to disregard media completely. A judge should never focus anything said in the media. A judge should not try to play to the gallery to what the media wants him to do. A judge is not supposed to give his attention to anything that is said in the media. A judge is supposed to sit and assess a case based on the materials placed before him within the four corners of law. That's all. He is not satisfying anybody. He is satisfying his own conscience, and he is satisfying law, the requirements of law. He is bound by the rule of law. He goes by the rule of law. So it is a challenge that is now posed to the judges on all sides, but it is better that we develop this attitude of not getting really pulled away by the opinions of media.
Thank you, sir. Very correctly said. So the next one, or the last one, which we would like to take up by Agniva, is that, sir, when an advocate or the new advocate who has just joined practice is facing or is able to understand that sometimes a judge is biased. Now, what would be his role? What would be his role in the court to make the submissions and to defend the client, and what not to do also if he's...
See, basically, as an advocate, when you get into the litigation, you must understand one thing. The judge who is sitting there has not jumped from the sky. He is a person who has also come from the same society. So whatever problems you find in the society, same problems you will find with judges also. So don't think that judges are some special beings which have dawned into the earth. No. All judges are fallible. There are judges who are conditioned. There are opinionated judges. There are biased judges. There are corrupt judges. There are all varieties of judges. So therefore, never expect the type. You don't please expect that the judge who is sitting there is a paragon of virtues every time. You have to manage all types of judges. That is why I told during the course of my talk that you are getting into a field where you will find a lot of mediocrity, where you will find a lot of such shortcuts being adopted. So therefore, you have your duty to be performed in the court. If you fail in that court, you must believe that there is an appellate system that will take care of it. That is why you have layers of appeals and all that provided to ensure that at some stage you get justice somewhere. Or else the number of times the orders and judgments gets interfered must only show you that there are lots of problems in the way in which cases are handled by the subordinate courts. So therefore, if you encounter a judge like that, you have to do your best, get an order or judgment from there, move ahead with the case to the superior court. So therefore, you have to be ready to handle all types of judges. You will not get a perfect. There is nothing called as a perfect judge. That's why I said that it's psychology, it's mind reading. You have to understand people, particularly in criminal litigation.
Just to add, we should also accept that a judge is also a human being.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sir, lastly, sir, any books which you would like to recommend on litigation or journals or anything, sir?
See, I basically, when it comes to penal code or the criminal procedure code, I generally follow Ratan Lal and Dheeraj Lal. I keep them as a standard. When it comes to Evidence Act, I generally try to follow Sarkar on Evidence Act. I also, when it comes to medical jurisprudence or it comes to toxicology, I have Moody's. So I have some standard books like that. According to me, a new entrant into the profession should not be taking textbooks and studying, because by the 5th or the 6th page you will sleep. Let us be frank.
Yes,
That is why I said I recommended strongly journals. Always update yourself, be very regular with journals. Have a SEC criminal with you. Subscribe for SEC criminal. Subscribe for criminal law journals. You will have your local law weeklies dealing exclusively with criminal law. Subscribe for that. Keep updating, keep reading. In the beginning, you will not understand anything. Again, I'll tell you, you will not understand. The more you keep reading it, you will understand how the march of law is happening in a particular field. In 138, what is happening? On the IPC, what is happening? On the POCSO side, what is happening? So you will be able to continuously update yourself on the developments of law. So I would strongly recommend, more than the textbooks, reading of journals only. Is there a network problem?
So we can hear you.
Yeah, I thought he has some network problem. Yeah. Any other questions? I think he has some network problem.
I guess he'll join.
Yeah, no problem. I'll wait. No problem. This is something which I should have done by coming to Calcutta, and physically I should have seen the students and done it. So it would have been even more effective. But then, considering the present position, this is the best that we can do.
Yes, so that would have been our honor to host you physically in our college.
That's right. There is nothing like sharing the experience by physically looking at a person and doing it. That's the best way of understanding, because I am now assuming that people have heard me.
Sundar is back.
Sir, you are on mute.
Sorry, sir, I my internet connectivity.
Absolutely no
Sir,
problem.
we are really happy that you accepted the invitation, and we learned a lot being a faculty member at NUJS, and also the students. I'm very sure that we today learned a lot, and we'll be happy that when the university opens and everything becomes normal, we'll be glad to have you in our campus as well. So thank you for accepting the invitation. Now I request Shreya to kindly deliver the formal vote of thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, as the co-convener of Society for Advancement of Criminal Justice, I take this opportunity to extend my sincere gratitude to Honorable Mr. Justice N. Anand Venkatesh, sir, for joining us today in this workshop and sharing with us his valuable expertise and thoughts on the theme Criminal Litigation as a Career. So, we are truly privileged to have interacted with you and learned the nuances of the theme from your valuable experiences. I personally have found the insights given by you upon the importance of inculcating reading habits, which will eventually help us in expanding our thought process, honing language and communication skills, importance of having societal connections, mastering the facts of the cases, amongst many other things, which will be the building blocks of a career in litigation. I also hope that each one of us present here have benefited from what has been truly an enlightening session. I'm sure that the knowledge shared by you today will help many of us in shaping our careers in litigation. So, we are extremely honored that you graced us with your presence. Now, I would also like to thank all the participants for joining and for putting up such wonderful questions and helping us making this session successful. I would also like to thank our faculty advisors, Suja Kanta Baladikari sirs, for succinctly moderating the session. Now, we would be taking a 20 minutes break. So I would request you all to join us back at sharp 1:30 p.m. for our next session with Advocate Mr. Adit Pujari, who will be speaking with us on the theme CRPC from a practitioner's perspective. So thank you, sir, for this wonderful session. We all are really grateful to have joined you today for this session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.